Korean Mafia boss caught his black maid fleeing at dawn. He followed her and never came back. Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell so you never miss an update. Drop a like if you're ready for this journey, and let me know in the comments, what state or country are you watching from today? I love seeing how far this community reaches. Now let's begin. Seoul, South Korea, a city where neon lights bleed into ancient shadows, where glass towers pierce the heavens while secrets fester in the streets below. It is a place of contradictions, of breathtaking beauty and unspeakable darkness, of billion-dollar deals sealed in boardrooms and blood debts settled in abandoned warehouses. And in the blackest heart of this metropolis, one name echoed like a death sentence: Kang Jae-won. At 32 years old, Jae-won had become the youngest leader the Baek Ho Syndicate had ever crowned. His ascension had not been gentle. It had been carved through betrayal, baptized in violence, and sealed with the kind of ruthlessness that made seasoned criminals cross themselves when they heard his name. They called him the Phantom of Gangnam, because when Kang Jae-won decided someone needed to disappear, they simply ceased to exist. No body, no trace, no memory, just whispers and warnings passed between trembling lips. But power, he had learned, was a throne made of ice. The higher you climbed, the colder it became. The more you possessed, the less you felt. And at the very top, where the air was thin and the view was endless, you realized the most devastating truth of all. You were completely, utterly alone. His penthouse occupied the crown of one of Seoul's tallest buildings, a fortress of glass and steel suspended 63 floors above the chaos of ordinary lives. From his windows, he could see the entire city sprawled beneath him like a circuit board of light and shadow. Every district, every neighborhood, every corner where his influence reached, he owned this view. He owned the city. But ownership, he had discovered, was not the same as belonging. The penthouse itself was a monument to minimalism and control. Every piece of furniture had been selected for its clean lines and neutral colors. Every surface gleamed with the kind of perfection that only obsessive maintenance could achieve. There were no photographs on the walls, no personal artifacts on the shelves, no evidence that a human being actually lived here rather than simply existed. Jae-won preferred it that way. Emotion was clutter. Attachment was weakness. The less you needed, the less they could take from you. He had learned that lesson early, and he had learned it well. But then she arrived, and everything he thought he knew began to crumble. Amara Okonkwo came to the Kang penthouse on a Tuesday morning when the rain fell like tears from a grieving sky. She was 25 years old, with skin the color of burnished mahogany, and eyes that held depths most people never bothered to explore. Her clothes were simple, clean but worn, the kind of garments that spoke of careful maintenance rather than recent purchase. In her hands, she clutched a folder containing her employment documents, her fingers pressing into the paper as if it might fly away. The agency had sent her as a replacement. The previous housekeeper had quit without notice, the fourth one in 8 months. Nobody lasted long in the Kang household. The whispered rumors about the owner were enough to send most applicants running before they even signed the contract. Those who stayed never stayed for long, but Amara could not afford to run. She had responsibilities that outweighed her fear, obligations that made her pride a luxury she could not afford. What she carried in her heart, the secret burden that drove her forward each day, was worth any risk, worth any terror, worth working for a man whose name made grown men flinch. The elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse, and Amara stepped into a world she had only seen in the pages of magazines. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the sprawling cityscape in all its rain-washed glory. The furniture was sparse but impossibly expensive, each piece probably costing more than she earned in a year. The air itself seemed different here, filtered and pure, as if even the atmosphere knew its place in the hierarchy. She stood frozen for a moment, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of wealth surrounding her. In her 25 years, she had cleaned many homes, small apartments crammed with memories, middle-class houses filled with the comfortable chaos of family life, even a few wealthy residences that had impressed her with their size. But this was different. This was not a home. This was a statement, a declaration of power so absolute it needed no words. "You are the new housekeeper?" The voice came from behind her, and Amara spun to find a man in a crisp black suit, watching her with eyes that revealed nothing. His face was neutral, carefully composed, as if emotion were a foreign concept he had studied but never quite mastered. "Yes, sir." Amara bowed deeply, the gesture automatic after years of service work. "Amara Okonkwo, the agency sent me." The man studied her for a long moment, his gaze traveling from her face to her worn shoes and back again. Whatever conclusions he drew remained hidden behind that mask of professional detachment. "I am Secretary Yoon," he said. "I manage Mr. Kang's household affairs. You will follow the rules exactly as I explain them. There will be no second chances, no exceptions, no excuses. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." Secretary Yoon produced a printed sheet from somewhere within his jacket and handed it to her. The paper was heavy, expensive, covered in neat lines of text. "These are your duties and restrictions. Mr. Kang values his privacy above all else. You will not speak to him unless spoken to. You will not enter his study under any circumstances. You will not ask questions about his business or his associates. You will not receive personal visitors during working hours. You will not use your mobile phone except during designated breaks. You will not discuss anything you see or hear in this household with anyone outside of it. You will not—" "I understand." The interruption was quiet, almost gentle, but it stopped Secretary Yoon mid-sentence. His eyebrow twitched slightly, the only crack in his professional composure. "I'm here to work," Amara continued, meeting his gaze with steady calm. "Nothing more." For a moment, something flickered in Secretary Yoon's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or the faintest glimmer of respect. Most new employees cowered through this speech, nodding frantically, already planning their escape. This woman stood before him with the quiet dignity of someone who had faced worse than a list of rules. He said nothing about the interruption, simply nodded and gestured for her to follow. The tour of the penthouse took 20 minutes. The kitchen was a marvel of modern technology, equipped with appliances Amara had never seen before, and probably could not pronounce. Every surface gleamed, every tool hung in perfect alignment. It was less a place for cooking than a shrine to culinary possibility. The living areas were equally pristine, furnished with pieces that looked more like sculptures than functional objects. Amara found herself walking carefully, afraid that her mere presence might somehow diminish the perfection. The guest rooms were never used, Secretary Yoon informed her. They existed for appearance rather than purpose, maintained in a state of perpetual readiness for visitors who never came. And at the end of a long hallway, a heavy wooden door remained firmly closed. "The study," Secretary Yoon said, his voice dropping slightly. "You do not clean it, you do not touch it, you do not look at it, you do not approach it under any circumstances. Is that understood?" Amara nodded. "Understood. Good." He consulted his tablet briefly. "Mr. Kang is rarely home during daylight hours. Your shift begins at 6 in the morning and ends at 8 in the evening. You will have Sundays off. Your quarters are in the service area behind the kitchen. Is everything clear?" "Yes, sir." "Then you may begin." And just like that, Amara Okonkwo's new life began. For the first 2 weeks, Amara barely saw her employer. Kang Jae-won was a ghost in his own home, leaving before the sun rose and returning well past midnight. She knew he existed only from the evidence he left behind. A coffee cup in the sink, always placed in exactly the same position. A jacket draped over a chair in the living room, the fabric still carrying traces of expensive cologne and cigarette smoke. Footprints on the freshly cleaned floors that appeared and disappeared like messages from another dimension. She began to think of him as a legend, rather than a man. A story told in whispers and warnings, something to be feared but never seen. She cleaned. She cooked. She maintained the penthouse in the pristine condition it demanded. And when her shift ended, she retreated to her small room behind the kitchen and counted the days until her first paycheck. The money was good, better than good. It was life-changing, but nothing in life came without cost. During those first weeks, Amara learned the rhythms of the household. Secretary Yoon visited daily, his presence efficient and unremarkable. Various men in expensive suits came and went, their conversations conducted in low voices behind closed doors. Sometimes she heard raised voices from the study, angry words in Korean that she didn't fully understand, but whose tone needed no translation. She learned to make herself invisible, to move through rooms like a shadow, cleaning around conversations as if she were furniture rather than flesh, to lower her eyes when the men passed, to keep her expression neutral when she overheard fragments of discussions that made her blood run cold. She heard things, terrible things, references to shipments and territories, mentions of names followed by ominous silences. Once, a conversation about someone who had been dealt with, spoken in the casual tone most people reserved for discussing the weather. She pretended not to hear. She pretended not to understand. She was here to work, nothing more. What these men did, what her employer was responsible for, none of that was her concern. She had her own problems, her own responsibilities, her own secrets to protect. But if Amara thought she was invisible in the Kang household, she was gravely mistaken. Jae-won noticed her from the very first day. He had been in his study when she arrived, watching through the security cameras as she stepped out of the elevator. He had seen her freeze at the sight of his home, watched her compose herself with visible effort, observed the way she bowed too deeply to Secretary Yoon. He had expected another nervous, disposable employee who would flee within a month. They always did. The rumors about him were enough to frighten away most, and those who stayed despite the fear usually lasted until they actually encountered him in person. But there was something different about this one. It was in her eyes, behind the exhaustion, behind the careful submission. There was fire, a determination that had survived whatever hardships had brought her to his door, a strength that had not been broken despite what he suspected were years of trying. And there was something else, a secret. Kang Jae-won had built his empire on reading people. He could identify weakness from across a crowded room, sense betrayal before it was even conceived, smell a lie like a shark smelling blood in the water. It was a skill that had kept him alive in a world where death hid behind every smile and every handshake. Everything about Amara Okonkwo told him she was hiding something. The question was what? And Jae-won had never been good at leaving questions unanswered. The first time they truly spoke was 3 weeks after her arrival. Amara was in the kitchen at 5:30 in the morning, preparing breakfast as she always did. She had learned through careful observation that Mr. Kang preferred traditional Korean breakfast. Simple dishes made with precision and care. Nothing elaborate, nothing excessive, but everything perfect. She was arranging the banchan, the small side dishes that accompanied the main meal, when she felt a presence behind her. The sensation was subtle, like a shift in air pressure, but it was enough to make her freeze. She turned and found him standing in the doorway, watching her. Kang Jae-won was dressed in a dark suit that probably cost more than she earned in 6 months. His black hair was perfectly styled, not a strand out of place. His face betrayed nothing, composed into the kind of neutrality that takes years to perfect. But his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, seemed to see right through her, past the uniform, past the professional demeanor, past all the walls she had built to protect herself. She felt suddenly naked, exposed, as if every secret she had ever kept was written on her face in letters he could easily read. "You're early," he said. His voice was low, smooth, carrying an undercurrent of danger that made her skin prickle. It was the voice of a man who never needed to raise it, because everyone already knew what he was capable of. Amara bowed quickly, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I apologize if I disturbed you, sir. I didn't realize you were home. I'm always home." She didn't know how to respond to that, so she said nothing. It seemed safer. Jae-won moved into the kitchen, his footsteps silent on the tile floor. Amara instinctively stepped back, putting the kitchen island between them. He noticed. Of course he noticed. He noticed everything. "You've been here 3 weeks, he said, pouring himself a cup of coffee from the pot she had prepared. His movements were precise, economical, without a single wasted motion. "Most housekeepers don't last that long." "I need the job, sir." "Why?" The question was simple, but the weight behind it was immense. Amara felt her heart rate increase, could feel the pulse jumping in her throat. She had prepared for this possibility, had rehearsed her answers 100 times in the small room behind the kitchen. "I have debts to pay," she said carefully, keeping her voice steady. "Family obligations." Jae-won sipped his coffee, studying her over the rim of the cup. His eyes never left her face. "Family obligations," he repeated. "That's a very vague answer." "It's the truth, sir." "Is it?" Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Amara kept her eyes lowered, her hands clasped in front of her, trying to make herself as small and non-threatening as possible. She could feel him analyzing her, dissecting her, searching for the crack in her armor. The moment seemed to last forever. Finally, he set down his cup. "Breakfast looks good," he said, and then he was gone, leaving her alone with her racing heart and trembling hands. After that morning, Jae-won began to appear more frequently. At first it seemed coincidental. He would be in the living room when she came to dust. He would pass through the kitchen while she was cooking. He would return from his study just as she was finishing the hallway. But Amara quickly learned that nothing about Kang Jae-won was coincidental. Every appearance was deliberate. Every encounter was calculated. He was studying her, she realized, watching her the way a predator watches potential prey. The thought should have terrified her. In some ways it did. But there was something else beneath the fear, something she didn't want to examine too closely. A curiosity that matched his own, a fascination with this dangerous man who moved through the world like a shark through dark water. She found herself watching him too, the way he held himself, always controlled, always coiled, the way his face never betrayed emotion, as if he had spent years practicing stillness. The way his eyes would occasionally flicker with something she couldn't identify, some buried feeling that surfaced for just a moment before being dragged back down. He was a puzzle, and despite everything she knew about him, despite every warning instinct screaming at her to keep her head down and do her job, Amara found herself wanting to solve him. Secretary Yoon noticed the change immediately. In the 5 years he had served the Kang family, he had never seen Jae-won show interest in any of the household staff. They were invisible to him, interchangeable, disposable, tools to be used and replaced as needed, nothing more. But now his employer was asking questions. "The new housekeeper," Jae-won said one evening, not looking up from the documents spread across his desk. "What do you know about her?" Secretary Yoon consulted his tablet. "Amara Okonkwo, 25 years old, originally from Nigeria, moved to South Korea 6 years ago. She has full legal work authorization, no criminal record, no known affiliations with any organizations. She worked at a restaurant and a hotel before the agency hired her. Her references were satisfactory. Family, according to her file, her parents are deceased, no siblings. She listed no emergency contacts." Jae-won frowned slightly. No emergency contacts, no family, no connections. On paper, Amara Okonkwo was exactly what she appeared to be. A lonely young woman trying to survive in a foreign city, an immigrant working hard to build something from nothing, unremarkable, uncomplicated. But Jae-won hadn't survived this long by trusting paper. "Have her followed," he said. Secretary Yoon hesitated, a rare crack in his professional composure. "Sir, if I may ask, is there a specific concern?" Jae-won finally looked up, and there was something in his eyes that Secretary Yoon couldn't quite identify. It wasn't suspicion, not entirely. It was something else, something that looked almost like curiosity. "No specific concern," Jae-won said. "I just want to know who's living in my home." "Understood, sir. I'll arrange surveillance immediately." The reports began arriving within days. Amara Okonkwo left the penthouse every Sunday at precisely 9 in the morning. She took the subway across the city to a neighborhood in the southern part of Seoul, a modest area far from the gleaming towers of Gangnam. She would enter a small apartment building and not emerge for several hours. "It's an apartment complex," Secretary Yoon reported. "Unit 507. The lease is under the name Grace Mensa." "Who is Grace Mensa?" "We're still investigating." Jae-won leaned back in his chair, turning a pen over in his fingers. It was an old habit, a physical manifestation of his racing thoughts. "What else?" "She visits a pharmacy twice a week. The purchases are unusual." "Unusual how?" "Prescription medications, but the quantities suggest they're not for her. The types of medication are primarily treatments associated with chronic illness, specifically diabetes management and kidney function support." The pen stopped moving in Jae-won's hand. "Continue the surveillance," he said. "I want to know everything." Amara was unaware that she was being watched. She moved through her days with the same careful routine, cleaning and cooking and maintaining the perfect silence that Mr. Kang seemed to require. She was professional, she was invisible, she was exactly what she needed to be. But on Sundays, she allowed herself to be someone else. She would wake early, before her alarm, excitement and anxiety mixing in her chest. She would choose her nicest clothes, nothing fancy, but clean and bright, colors that made her feel like herself, rather than a servant. She would take the subway across the city, watching the neighborhoods change from wealthy to modest to worn, from gleaming glass to weathered concrete. And when she finally reached that small apartment on the 5th floor, she would become the person she truly was. "Amara!" The door flew open before she could knock, and a small body crashed into her legs with the force of a miniature hurricane. Amara laughed, the first genuine sound of joy she had made all week. "Hello, my precious one," she said, kneeling down to embrace the child. "Have you been good this week?" The little girl, barely 5 years old, nodded enthusiastically. Her name was Zuri, and she had her mother's eyes, bright with intelligence and mischief. "I helped Auntie Grace make jollof rice," Zuri announced proudly. "And I learned all my letters at school. Want to see? Want to see my workbook?" "I want to see everything, baby. Everything." Amara lifted the child into her arms and carried her inside, where an elderly woman was rising slowly from a chair. Grace Mensa was 68 years old, and the toll of her illness was evident in her thin frame and the slight tremor in her hands. But her eyes were warm as she watched the reunion, filled with the kind of love that transcends blood and biology. "You're too thin," Grace said immediately, the Nigerian accent still strong after all these years abroad. "Are they not feeding you at that job?" "I'm fine, Auntie. Please sit down. You shouldn't be standing so much. I'm old, not dead. I can stand in my own home." But she sat anyway, and Amara noticed the slight wince she tried to hide. The diabetes was getting worse. The kidney function was declining despite the medications. The doctors had been clear. Without proper treatment, without dialysis, and eventually a transplant that cost more money than they could ever hope to have, Grace's time was limited. And so Amara worked. She worked in a place that scared her, for a man who terrified her, doing a job that required her to be invisible, because this woman and this child were all she had left in the world, and she would do anything to keep them safe. Grace was not her aunt by blood. Amara's story was one of loss and survival, of tragedy and unexpected grace. She had come to Korea 6 years ago, following a man who had promised her the world. He had been charming, successful, everything a young woman from Lagos could dream of. He had painted pictures of a beautiful life in a modern country, of opportunities and prosperity and happiness. The reality had been different. The relationship had turned dark within months. The charming man became controlling, then cruel, then dangerous. Amara had endured 2 years of escalating abuse before finding the courage to escape. She had fled with nothing but the clothes on her back and a handful of one she had secretly saved. Homeless, terrified, unable to speak the language, she had wandered the streets of Seoul, wondering if she would survive the night. That was when Grace found her. The elderly Nigerian woman had been walking home from church when she spotted Amara huddled in a doorway, trying to make herself invisible. Something in Grace's heart had recognized something in Amara's eyes. The old woman had approached without fear, had spoken in the Igbo dialect of Amara's childhood, had offered food and shelter without asking anything in return. Grace had saved her life. She had taken Amara in, helped her find work, taught her Korean, encouraged her to believe in a future. She had become the mother Amara had lost years ago, the family she had thought she would never have again. And then there was Zuri. The child was the daughter of Grace's own niece, a young woman who had died in a car accident 2 years ago. The father had been Korean, a man who disappeared long before the baby was born, wanting nothing to do with the complications of an unplanned child. And so the three of them, an elderly Nigerian woman with failing health, a young abuse survivor with nothing to offer, and an orphaned mixed-race child with no other family, had become something more. They had become everything to each other. "Did you bring the medicine?" Grace asked quietly, after Zuri had run off to find a drawing she wanted to show Amara. Amara nodded, pulling a small bag from her purse. "It's getting harder to afford," she admitted. "The prices keep going up, but I got this month's supply." "You're working too hard." "I'm working exactly as hard as I need to." Grace reached out and took her hand, her grip weaker than it used to be. "I worry about you, child. That place you work. Those people. I've heard stories about the wealthy men in Gangnam, about what they do behind their glass towers." "Stories are just stories, Auntie. I clean a rich man's house. That's all." "Is it?" Amara forced a smile, squeezing the older woman's hand. "It is. Now tell me about Zuri's school. Is she still having trouble with her Korean writing?" The subject was changed, but the worry in Grace's eyes remained. Jae-won read the final surveillance report in his study. The door locked, the room silent, except for the soft tick of an antique clock. Amara Okonkwo was not what she appeared. She was not a simple housekeeper with vague debts to pay. She was a woman carrying an impossible burden, supporting an elderly woman who was not her relative, raising a child who was not her daughter, spending every one she earned on medicine and rent and school fees, working herself to exhaustion for people who had no claim on her except love, and she had never said a word about any of it. Jae-won set down the report and stared at the wall, his thoughts churning like dark water. In his world, everyone had an angle. Everyone wanted something. Loyalty was bought with money and maintained with fear. Love was a weapon to be used against you, a weakness that enemies could exploit. He had learned these lessons early, written in bruises on his skin and burned into his memory. He had built his entire life around them. But this woman, this ordinary, exhausted, stubborn woman, she confused him. Why would she sacrifice so much for people who weren't even her family? Why would she work in a place that clearly frightened her, for a man whose reputation made most people cross the street to avoid? Why did she have such fire in her eyes when she should have been broken by life years ago? He thought about his own history, about his mother, who had loved him fiercely and died too young because his father considered her medical care an unnecessary expense, about the years of violence and neglect that had shaped him into the creature he had become, about the wall he had built around his heart, brick by brick, until nothing could get through. This woman had been through hell. He could see it in the surveillance reports, in the gaps between the facts, the abusive relationship, the years of poverty, the constant struggle to survive in a foreign country where she didn't belong. She had every reason to be bitter, to be hard, to look out for herself and let the rest of the world burn. Instead, She had built a family from broken pieces. She had chosen love over self-preservation. She had remained soft in a world that rewarded hardness. And Jae-won found himself wanting to understand how. No, he needed to understand. Because if Amara Okonkwo was truly what she appeared to be, then she was something he had long stopped believing existed. Something good. The next morning, Jae-won found Amara in the kitchen as usual. But this time, instead of leaving after a few cold words, he sat down at the table. She froze mid-motion, a ladle suspended over a pot of doenjang jjigae, her eyes widening with barely concealed alarm. "Sir, is something wrong with the breakfast?" "Sit down," he said. "I'm sorry, sit down." It wasn't a request. Amara set down the ladle with trembling hands and lowered herself into the chair across from him. She kept her eyes on the table, her heart pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. This was it, she thought. He knows. He's found out something. He's going to fire me. He's going to... How long have you been taking care of them? The color drained from her face. I don't know what you mean, sir. Grace Mensa, the child. How long? Amara's hands clenched in her lap until her knuckles ached. The world seemed to tilt beneath her, all her carefully constructed defenses crumbling with those simple words. He knew. He knew everything. She had been so careful, so meticulous about keeping her two lives separate, but he had found out anyway, because of course he had. A man like Kang Jae-won didn't rise to power by missing details. And now she would lose her job, then she would lose the apartment, then she would lose them. "Please," she whispered, hating the desperation in her voice but unable to hide it. "Please don't fire me. I'll work harder. I'll do anything. I need this job. I'm not going to fire you." She looked up, shocked. Jae-won's face was as unreadable as ever, but there was something in his voice that hadn't been there before. Something that didn't match the cold, dangerous man she had been so afraid of. Something almost soft. 4 years. She said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been with Auntie Grace for 4 years. Zuri came 2 years ago when her mother died. They're not your family. They're all the family I have." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning and pain and defiance. Jae-won felt something shift in his chest. Something he couldn't identify. Something he wasn't sure he wanted to. "Why didn't you include them on your application?" he asked. "A sick relative and a child would have made you a more sympathetic candidate." Amara shook her head slowly. "People don't want employees with complications. I've been turned down from jobs before because they thought I would be unreliable, that I would miss work or be distracted by my personal life. I couldn't risk it. Not again. So you lied. I omitted. There's a difference. A ghost of something, not quite a smile, but close, crossed Jae-won's face. "Is there?" Amara met his eyes for the first time since sitting down. There was fear there, yes, but also something else, a stubborn dignity that refused to be extinguished. "Yes," she said. "Lying is saying something false. Omitting is just not saying everything that's true. I never lied to you, Mr. Kang. I do have debts. I do have obligations. I just didn't explain why." Jae-won leaned back in his chair, studying this woman who had just argued semantics with the head of the Baek Ho Syndicate. She should have been begging for forgiveness. She should have been crying, pleading, promising anything to keep her job. Instead, she sat across from him with her chin raised and her eyes steady, defending her honor with the same fire he had seen from the first day. "The old woman is sick," he said. "Yes, the treatments are expensive. Yes, your salary isn't enough." Amara's jaw tightened. "I'm managing." "Are you?" She didn't answer because they both knew the truth. She wasn't managing. She was drowning. Every month was a calculation. Which bills could be delayed without consequences? Which meals could be skipped without Zuri noticing? Which medications were absolutely essential and which could be stretched a few extra days? She was one emergency away from losing everything, and they both knew it. Jae-won stood abruptly. "Come with me." "Sir?" "Now." He walked out of the kitchen without waiting to see if she would follow. After a moment of hesitation, she did. He led her through the penthouse, down the long hallway toward the heavy wooden door at the end, the study. The forbidden room. Secretary Yoon's warnings echoed in her head as Jae-won pushed open the door and gestured for her to enter. Amara stepped inside and stopped. She didn't know what she had expected. Weapons, perhaps. Evidence of crimes. Something dark and terrible that matched the rumors about this man. Instead, she found a library. The walls were lined with books. Hundreds of them. Maybe thousands. The shelves reached the ceiling, a rolling ladder providing access to the highest volumes. A large desk sat near the window, neat and organized, with a single lamp and a leather chair. And on the desk, a photograph. Jae-won noticed where her eyes had landed. "My mother," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "She died when I was 12. Amara looked at the photograph. A beautiful Korean woman with kind eyes, her arm around a young boy who had not yet learned to hide his emotions. The boy was smiling, his face open and innocent. Nothing like the man who stood beside her now. She was sick for a long time, Jaewon continued. My father refused to get her proper treatment. He said it was too expensive, said she was weak, said real strength meant enduring suffering without complaint. His voice was flat, controlled, but Amara could hear the ancient rage beneath the surface, the wound that had never healed. I promised myself, he said, that I would never let money be the reason someone I cared about suffered. He turned to face her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. I'm going to pay for Grace's treatment. Amara stared at him. What? Her dialysis, her medications, everything she needs. I'll pay for it. The world tilted again, but in a different direction this time. I don't understand. Why would you? Because I can. He moved closer, and for the first time, his voice gentled. Because you work for me, which makes your problems my problems. Because, he stopped, something flickering across his face, something vulnerable and quickly hidden. Because you remind me of someone I used to be, before all of this. Amara's eyes filled with tears. I can't accept that, sir. I can't. It's too much. The treatment alone costs. I know what it costs. I don't care what it costs. He stepped closer still, and she could see now what she had never noticed before. Behind the cold mask, behind the dangerous reputation, there was something else. Loneliness, pain, a desperate buried longing for connection. You've been carrying this alone for years, he said quietly. Let someone help you. But why? The tears spilled over, running down her cheeks. You don't even know me. Jaewon looked at her for a long moment, and there was something in his eyes that made her heart stutter. I'd like to, he said, if you'll let me. And just like that, dear listeners, everything changed. Quick reminder, if you're enjoying this story, tap that like button and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what happens next. Trust me, you won't want to miss the rest of this journey. Now back to our story. The treatment was arranged within days. Amara tried to argue, to negotiate, to at least set up some kind of payment plan that would allow her to maintain her dignity. Jaewon refused every attempt with the same calm certainty. The money, he said, was nothing to him, less than nothing, a rounding error in his vast fortune. What mattered was that Grace would receive proper care. What mattered was that Amara would stop slowly killing herself with stress and exhaustion. What mattered, though he never said it aloud, was that he had found something worth protecting. In the weeks that followed, everything shifted. Jaewon began coming home earlier. He would sit in the kitchen while Amara cooked, asking her questions about her life, her past, her hopes for the future. He wanted to know about Nigeria, about her childhood, about the dreams she had carried across oceans. She told him about Lagos, about the markets full of color and noise, about her mother's cooking and her father's laughter. She told him about the education she had fought for, the degree she had earned despite every obstacle. She told him about the man who had promised her everything and delivered only pain. In return, he told her about his own history, about growing up in the shadow of his father's violence and contempt, about the beatings that taught him to hide his emotions, about clawing his way to the top of an organization he sometimes despised because the alternative was letting someone worse take control. They talked for hours, sometimes about important things, about philosophy and morality and the nature of good and evil, sometimes about nothing at all, about favorite foods and childhood memories and the small details that make up a life. Secretary Yoon watched these developments with growing concern. Sir, he said one evening when Amara had retired to her room, I feel I should remind you of the risks of involvement with household staff. Jaewon didn't look up from his book. What risks would those be? She could be a plant, a spy from another organization, someone sent to gather information or create a vulnerability. She's not. With respect, sir, how can you be certain? Jaewon finally raised his eyes, and there was something in them that made Secretary Yoon step back. Because I know. I've read every report. I've watched her every move. I've spoken with her every day for weeks. Amara Okonkwo is exactly what she appears to be. A good person in an impossible situation, doing her best to survive. And that's precisely what a well-trained operative would appear to be. Secretary Yoon, Jaewon's voice hardened. I appreciate your concern, but this matter is not up for discussion. Is that understood? Secretary Yoon bowed stiffly. Understood, sir. But he didn't stop watching, and he wasn't the only one. Grace's condition stabilized within weeks of beginning proper treatment. The dialysis helped. The new medications helped. The removal of constant financial stress helped most of all. For the first time in years, she could focus on her health rather than her bills. Amara received the call from the clinic on a Tuesday afternoon. She was cleaning the living room when her phone buzzed, and she answered with her heart in her throat, prepared for bad news. Prepared for disaster, prepared for the other shoe to finally drop. Instead, the doctor's voice was warm with genuine pleasure. Grace's kidney function had improved. The dialysis was working better than expected. With continued treatment and proper care, her prognosis was excellent. She would need to continue the therapy indefinitely, but she could live a full, comfortable life. Amara hung up the phone and burst into tears. That was how Jaewon found her, collapsed on his designer sofa, sobbing into her hands. He stood in the doorway for a moment, uncertain. This was unfamiliar territory. In his world, tears were a sign of weakness to be exploited or a manipulation to be resisted. He had no framework for tears of joy, for emotion that existed without agenda, but something in him couldn't walk away. He crossed the room and sat beside her. "Good news or bad?" he asked quietly. "Good." She looked up at him, her face wet and shining, her smile so bright it seemed to light the room. "Good news. She's going to be okay. Because of you, she's going to be okay." Before she could stop herself, before she could think about what she was doing, she threw her arms around him. Jaewon went rigid. When was the last time someone had embraced him? Not for show, not for manipulation, not as a precursor to a demand, just because they were happy and wanted to share that happiness with him. He couldn't remember. Slowly, hesitantly, he wrapped his arms around her. She was warm and soft and real. She smelled like the kitchen and the cleaning products she used and something else, something that was just her, something that made him want to bury his face in her hair and never move again. He closed his eyes and let himself hold her, let himself be held, and felt something inside him that had been frozen for 15 years begin to thaw. Amara pulled back suddenly, horror dawning on her face. "I'm so sorry, sir. I'm so sorry. That was completely inappropriate. I shouldn't have. I don't know what came over me. Jaewon." She blinked. "What?" "My name is Jaewon. You can use it." I couldn't possibly. You just hugged me. I think we're past formal titles." A surprised laugh escaped her, and she quickly covered her mouth, her eyes wide above her fingers. "I really am sorry. I was just so happy, and you were there, and Amara." He reached out and gently lowered her hand from her face. "Don't apologize for being happy. Don't apologize for showing emotion. In this house with me, you don't have to be anyone other than who you are." She stared at him. This man who commanded armies of criminals, who had killed and ordered killings, whose name made grown men tremble with fear, and all she could see was the lonely boy in the photograph, the one whose mother had died because his father didn't think she was worth saving, the one who had built walls around his heart so high and so thick that no one had ever thought to try climbing them. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. You don't need to thank me. I do. No one has ever." She trailed off, shaking her head. "You're not what I expected, Jaewon." "Neither are you." They sat in silence for a moment, the space between them charged with something new, something neither of them was ready to name. Finally, Amara stood. I should finish cleaning." Jaewon nodded, but as she walked away, he called out, "Amara." She turned. "Would you like to have dinner with me tonight? Not as employee and employer. Just dinner." Her heart skipped a beat, tripped, fell. Yes," she said. "I'd like that." He smiled, a real smile that transformed his face, that made him look younger and softer and achingly human, and Amara felt the ground shift beneath her feet. She was falling for him, and she was terrified. Dinner became a regular occurrence. Every evening, after her work was done, Amara would change into something nicer than her cleaning uniform and join Jaewon in the dining room. Sometimes Secretary Yoon would arrange food from expensive restaurants. Sometimes they would order delivery from places that didn't usually deliver. Sometimes Amara would cook something herself, dishes from her childhood, and Jaewon would watch her with an expression that made her cheeks warm. They talked about everything. She told him about her parents, about the accident that had claimed their lives when she was 16. She told him about the years of loneliness afterward, shuffled between relatives who didn't want her. She told him about her decision to come to Korea, about the hope that had driven her and the despair that had nearly destroyed her. She told him about Grace finding her in that doorway, about the kindness that had saved her life. She told him about Zuri, about watching her grow, about the fierce determination to give that child the stability and love that Amara herself had been denied. She told him her dreams, small and practical ones, born from years of having nothing. A real apartment, not a cramped room in someone else's space. A savings account with more than a few won at the bottom. Zuri in a good school with friends and opportunities. Grace comfortable and cared for in her final years. A life that was simple and safe and enough. Jaewon told her things he had never told anyone. He told her about the day he took over the syndicate, about the blood on his hands that had never quite washed clean. He told her about his father, the previous leader, whose cruelty had known no bounds. About the night Jaewon had finally stood up to him, the confrontation that had ended with his father's death and Jae-won's ascension. He told her about the nightmares that still haunted him, the faces of people he had hurt, the weight of every decision he had ever made, the isolation of leadership, where every relationship was transactional and every smile hid a potential knife. "You're the first person who's looked at me without fear," he said one night. They were on the balcony. The city spread below them like a carpet of stars, the wind carrying the sounds of distant traffic. Everyone else sees the title, the power, the danger. "You see, I don't know what you see." Amara considered his words carefully. "I see a man," she said finally. "A complicated man who has done terrible things and carries the weight of them. A man who could have let his past destroy him but didn't. A man who saved my aunt's life for no reason except that he could. I had reasons." "Did you?" He looked at her, candlelight flickering in his eyes, and felt his carefully constructed walls crumble a little more. "I'm falling in love with you," he said. The words escaped before he could stop them, before he could calculate the consequences, before he could protect himself. They hung in the air between them. Amara's breath caught. "Jae-won, I know I shouldn't." The words kept coming, rushing out like water through a broken dam. "I know this can't end well. I know that my world is dangerous and dark, and that you deserve someone who can give you a normal life, a safe life, someone without blood on their hands." He turned away, unable to face her. "But I can't stop it. I tried. I can't." Silence. Then the rustle of fabric as she moved closer, then her hand on his arm, turning him back to face her. "I'm not asking for normal," she said. "I'm not asking for safe." She reached up and touched his face, and he leaned into her palm like a man dying of thirst who had finally found water. "I'm just asking for you. Whatever that means, whatever that brings. You don't know what you're saying. The syndicate, my enemies, the constant danger. I know exactly what I'm saying." Her voice was steady, certain. "I've been surviving my whole life, Jae-won. For once I want to live, and when I'm with you, I feel alive." He kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, as if he was afraid she would shatter. Or perhaps he was afraid he would. But she pulled him closer, her fingers tangling in his hair, and the kiss deepened. All the walls they had built around themselves came crashing down. When they finally separated, both breathless, Jae-won rested his forehead against hers. "This changes everything," he said. "I know. There will be people who try to use you against me, people who will see you as a weakness. Then we'll face them together." He laughed, a sound of pure wonder that seemed foreign coming from him. "How are you so brave?" "I'm not brave. I'm just too stubborn to be afraid." He kissed her again, and this time neither of them held back. The news spread through the syndicate like wildfire. The Phantom of Gangnam had taken a lover. Not a socialite, not a power player, not the daughter of another crime family seeking alliance through marriage. A housekeeper, a foreigner, a nobody from nowhere with no connections and no leverage. The reaction was mixed. Some of Jae-won's men thought it was weakness, proof that their leader had gone soft. They whispered in corners and exchanged meaningful glances, wondering if perhaps it was time for new leadership, time for someone stronger, someone unclouded by sentiment. Others saw it differently. They had watched Jae-won for years, had served him loyally through blood and fire, had seen the toll that isolation was taking, the way he grew harder and colder with each passing season. If this woman made him happy, if she gave him something to fight for beyond mere power, then perhaps she was exactly what he needed. A leader with nothing to lose was dangerous. A leader with something to protect was powerful. Secretary Yoon fell somewhere in between. He had been with the Kang family since Jae-won's father was in charge, had watched young Jae-won grow from a beaten child into a ruthless leader, had seen him survive things that would have destroyed lesser men, had witnessed the gradual erosion of the boy into the weapon the man had become, and now he watched his employer smile, really smile, the kind of smile that reached his eyes and transformed his face and made him look almost human. "You're worried," Jae-won said one morning, catching Secretary Yoon's expression. "It's not my place to be worried, sir. It's always been your place to speak freely. You're the only one who does." Secretary Yoon hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I'm worried that your feelings for her make you vulnerable. I'm worried that your enemies will see her as a target. And I'm worried," he paused, "I'm worried that if something happens to her it will destroy you in ways that none of them ever could." Jae-won was silent for a long moment. "You're right to worry," he said finally, "but I've spent my entire life being careful, calculating every risk, eliminating every weakness, trusting no one." He turned to face his secretary fully. "And do you know what it got me? Power, control, survival." He paused. "Loneliness, emptiness, a life that wasn't worth living. Sir, she makes me want to be better. She makes me believe I can be better. I won't give that up." Not for safety, not for anything. Secretary Yoon bowed his head. Then I will do everything in my power to protect her. For you. Thank you, old friend. Spring turned to summer, and summer to fall. Amara no longer worked as a housekeeper. The position had become impossible to maintain, too entangled with her new role in Jaewon's life. Instead, she spent her days between the penthouse and Grace's apartment, caring for the family she had built. Zuri adored Jaewon. She called him Scary Uncle at first, which made him laugh in a way that startled everyone who heard it. Later, as she lost her wariness of him, she promoted him to Not So Scary Uncle, and then simply Uncle. She demanded piggyback rides whenever he visited. She made him sit through elaborate tea parties with her stuffed animals. She asked him impossible questions about dinosaurs in space and whether magic was real, and he answered everyone with absolute seriousness. He pretended to be annoyed. Amara saw through him every time. "You're good with her," she said one evening, after Zuri had finally fallen asleep. They were in Grace's apartment, cleaning up the aftermath of a birthday party. Streamers hung from the ceiling. Cake crumbs dotted the carpet. A pile of presents sat in the corner, mostly from Uncle Jae-won, who had apparently never learned the concept of moderation. "She's easy to be good with," he said, picking up a balloon that had escaped. "She hasn't learned to be afraid yet." "That's not what I mean." Amara took the balloon from him, their fingers brushing. "I mean you're good with her. Patient, kind. You're different with her. She's innocent. So were you once." The words hung between them. Jae-won looked away. "That was a long time ago, was it?" Amara moved closer, forcing him to meet her eyes. "Because I see him sometimes. The boy in the photograph. When you're laughing at Zuri's jokes. When you're pretending her tea is the best you've ever had. When you think no one's watching." She touched his face. "He's still in there, Jae-won. All that darkness didn't destroy him. It just buried him." He caught her hand, pressed his lips to her palm. "You're the only one who sees him. Maybe I'm the only one who's looking." Grace watched them from her chair, her eyes bright with observation. She had her own opinions about Kang Jae-won. "He's dangerous," she said to Amara during one of their private moments, while Zuri napped in the other room and Jae-won had stepped out to take a call. "I've heard stories about his family, about what they do. What he does. I know what he is, Auntie." "Do you? Because the girl I took in, the one who worked 3 jobs to buy my medicine, that girl knew better than to fall in love with dangerous men. She'd already learned that lesson once." The reference to her past made Amara flinch. "Jae-won is nothing like him." No, the word was firm. "Certain, he's done terrible things, yes. Things that would make most people run. But he's also kind and gentle and lonely and desperately trying to be better. He's trying, Auntie. Every day he's trying." She took Grace's weathered hands in her own. "Doesn't everyone deserve the chance to be better?" Grace sighed heavily. "You sound like me 40 years ago. I said the same things about your Uncle Jerome." Amara knew the story. Grace's late husband had not been a saint. He had walked dangerous paths in his youth, had done things he wasn't proud of, but he had changed, had built a legitimate business, had spent the last 30 years of his life trying to make amends for the first 30. "You loved him until the day he died," Amara said. "I did." Grace squeezed her hands. "But loving him was the hardest thing I ever did. It nearly broke me a dozen times. I don't want that for you." "Maybe some things are worth being broken for." Grace looked at her. This girl she had saved from a doorway. This woman she had watched become strong and compassionate and stubborn beyond reason. And she saw something she hadn't expected. Happiness. Real, genuine, hard-won happiness. "Just be careful," she said finally. "And if he ever hurts you, I don't care how many criminals he commands. I will find a way to make him pay." Amara laughed and hugged her tightly. "I know you will, Auntie. I know you will." The trouble began in winter. A rival organization, the Haijo Gang, had been pushing into Baekho territory for months. Jae-won had responded with measured force, trying to maintain the balance of power without triggering an all-out war. But the Haijo were hungry. Their leader, Yoon Seung-chul, was young and ambitious and reckless. He had inherited his position 2 years ago and had been chafing against his organization's secondary status ever since. He wanted more territory, more power, more respect. And he was willing to do anything to get it. "The Phantom has a woman." Seung-chul spread photographs across the table, images captured by surveillance cameras and telephoto lenses. Amara leaving the penthouse. Amara entering Grace's apartment building. Amara laughing at something Jae-won said, her face bright with joy. "A foreigner, a nobody, and from what my sources tell me, he's obsessed with her." His lieutenants exchanged glances. "What are you suggesting?" asked his second-in-command, a grizzled veteran who had served under Seung-chul's father. Seung-chul smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "I'm suggesting that we give Kang Jae-won a reason to stop being so careful, a reason to make mistakes, A reason to destroy himself. You want to take her. I want to break him. Taking her is just the method. The veteran frowned. This is dangerous. If we harm his woman and fail to finish him, the retaliation will be, we won't fail. Xiong Chul's voice hardened. Once we have her, he'll come for her personally. He won't trust anyone else with her safety. And when he does, we'll be waiting. He looked around the table. The Phantom of Gangnam has survived this long by being untouchable, by having no weaknesses, but he has one now. He tapped the photograph, and we're going to use it. Amara was leaving the hospital when they grabbed her. Grace had had a routine checkup, and everything was perfect. Her numbers were stable. Her color was good. The doctors were pleased with her progress. Amara had walked out of the building with a heart full of hope, already composing a message to Jae-won sharing the good news. She was halfway to the bus stop, head down, typing on her phone, when a van screeched up beside her. She didn't even have time to scream. Strong arms grabbed her from behind. A hand clamped over her mouth, muffling her cry. She was lifted off her feet and thrown into the back of the vehicle. The doors slammed shut. The van sped away. It all happened in less than 30 seconds. In the darkness of the van, Amara fought. She kicked and scratched and bit, survival instincts honed by years of hardship taking over. But there were too many of them, too strong, and a cloth was pressed over her face, sweet and chemical, and the world went gray and then black. Jae-won got the call 20 minutes later. He was in a meeting with his financial advisors, discussing legitimate business investments, when Secretary Yoon burst through the door. One look at his face told Jae-won everything he needed to know. Something terrible had happened. What is it? His voice was ice. Miss Okonkwo. Secretary Yoon's composure cracked slightly. She's been taken. The temperature in the room seemed to drop by 10 degrees. The financial advisors, civilians, who had no idea who they were really working for, shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. They sensed the change in the air, the sudden presence of something dangerous and barely contained. Leave us, Jae-won said. They didn't need to be told twice. When the door closed, Jae-won stood. Who? Yoon Sung-chul and the Haijo. He's claiming responsibility. Secretary Yoon swallowed hard. He's demanding your territories. All of them. In exchange for her life. Jae-won's hands curled into fists. Every muscle in his body tensed. Every protective wall he had built crumbled beneath the weight of his fear, his rage. Where is she? We're working on it. Our people are tracking. I want every resource we have on this. Every contact, every informant, every soldier. I want Yoon Sung-chul found, and I want him to know exactly what happens to people who touch what's mine. Sir, if we mobilize that aggressively, there will be war. Then there will be war. Secretary Yoon had never seen his employer like this. Kang Jae-won was known for his cold calculation, his strategic patience, his ability to wait and plan and execute with surgical precision. This man, this creature of rage and terror, was something else entirely. Find her, Jae-won said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow more frightening than any scream. Find her, or I will burn this city to the ground looking for her myself. Amara woke in darkness. Her head throbbed. Her wrists ached. When she tried to move, she realized her hands were bound behind her back, secured with rough rope that bit into her skin. She was lying on a cold concrete floor in what appeared to be a warehouse or industrial building. Dim light filtered through grimy windows high above. The air smelled of dust and rust and something else, something metallic that made her stomach clench. She was not alone. A man stood across the room watching her. He was young, maybe 30, well-dressed in a way that seemed wrong in these surroundings. His face wore an expression of smug satisfaction that made her skin crawl. Ah, she's awake. He approached her, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. The famous Amara Okonkwo, the woman who captured the Phantom's heart. I must say, I expected someone more impressive. Amara forced herself to stay calm. Panicking wouldn't help. Crying wouldn't help. She needed to think. Needed to buy time. Needed to survive until what? Until Jae-won came for her. Because he would come. She knew that with absolute certainty. Who are you? She asked, pleased that her voice came out steady. Yoon Sung-chul. His smile widened. I'm sure your boyfriend has mentioned me. He hasn't. Seung-chul's smile faltered slightly. No? How disappointing. I'll have to make a more memorable impression then. He crouched down beside her, and Amara resisted the urge to flinch away. Here's how this is going to work. I'm going to send a message to Kang Jae-won. He's going to hand over his territories, his operations, everything. And when he does, I'll let you go. Simple. Amara shook her head slowly. He won't do it. Oh, I think he will. From what I've heard, you're quite special to him. You don't understand. She met his eyes, forcing herself to hold his gaze. He won't give up his organization. Not for me. Not for anyone. He can't or won't, both. She kept her voice calm, reasonable. The syndicate isn't just his property, it's his responsibility. Thousands of people depend on him. Their livelihoods, their safety, their families. He can't hand that over to someone like you. Sheng Chul's face darkened. Someone like me? Someone who would use an innocent woman as a bargaining chip. Someone who thinks power comes from cruelty rather than strength. The slap came fast and hard, snapping her head to the side. Amara tasted blood, felt the warm trickle from her split lip. You should be more careful how you speak to me, Sheng Chul said coldly. I don't need you in perfect condition. A few broken bones will still get my message across. Amara looked up at him, and despite the fear clawing at her insides, she forced herself to smile. You've already lost, she said. You just don't know it yet. Jae-won received the ransom video 12 hours after Amara's kidnapping. It showed her tied to a chair, a fresh bruise blooming on her cheek, blood drying on her lip. Sheng Chul stood beside her, delivering his demands with theatrical smugness, outlining exactly what Jae-won would need to surrender to see her alive again. But it was Amara who captured Jae-won's attention. In the middle of Sheng Chul's speech, while his back was turned, she looked directly at the camera. Her eyes moved deliberately, left, right, up, down, left, left. Then she blinked rapidly. 3 times. Pause. 2 times. Pause. 5 times. A code. They had developed it together, half as a joke, half as a precaution, a way to communicate if they were ever separated, ever in danger. Numbers corresponded to letters, directions indicated context. She was telling him where she was. Jae-won's heart surged with pride and relief. His clever, brave, impossible woman. I know where she is, he said. Secretary Yoon looked up from his phone. How? She told me. He didn't explain further. There wasn't time. The assault on Haijo's warehouse was swift and brutal. Jae-won led it personally, something he hadn't done in years. His lieutenants had begged him to stay back, to let them handle it, but he refused. This was beyond strategy, beyond protocol, beyond the careful calculations that had defined his leadership. This was about Amara. They hit the building from 3 sides at once. Sheng Chul's guards, expecting negotiation rather than attack, were overwhelmed within minutes. The Phantom of Gangnam moved through the chaos like his namesake, his gun finding targets with cold precision. He didn't think about the men who fell before him. He didn't think about the blood on his hands. He thought only of her. He found Sheng Chul in the main room, using Amara as a shield, a knife pressed to her throat. Stay back, Sheng Chul screamed. I'll kill her. I swear to God I'll... Jae-won. Amara's voice cut through the chaos. Calm, steady. He's terrified. His hand is shaking. She was right. Jae-won could see the tremor in Sheng Chul's grip, could see the wild fear in his eyes. The man had expected to negotiate from a position of power. He had never imagined that Kang Jae-won would come for him personally. Guns blazing. Consequences be damned. Let her go, Jae-won said, and I'll make it quick. You don't give the orders here. I'm in control. Amara moved. She dropped her weight suddenly, twisting away from the knife. Sheng Chul, startled, lost his grip on her. In the split second that followed, Jae-won raised his gun and fired. The bullet caught Sheng Chul in the shoulder, spinning him around. He crumpled to the ground, screaming in pain. Jae-won was at Amara's side in an instant, cutting her bonds, pulling her into his arms. She was shaking finally, the adrenaline fading, the terror catching up. I've got you, he whispered. I've got you. You're safe. I knew you'd come. Always. I'll always come for you. Behind them, Sheng Chul groaned. You haven't won. My people, they'll retaliate. They'll... Jae-won turned, keeping Amara behind him. He looked down at the man who had dared to take what was his, and there was no mercy in his eyes. Your people will receive what's left of you as a warning, he said, and if any of them ever threatens her again, I will personally erase your entire organization from existence. He raised the gun. Don't. Amara's hand caught his arm. He looked at her, confused. He hurt you. He was going to kill you. I know. She stepped closer, her grip tightening. But if you execute him like this, you'll start a war that might never end. His family will have to retaliate to save face. More people will die. More blood will be spilled. She cupped his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. You're better than this. Be better than this. The war inside Jae-won was visible on his face. Every instinct screamed for blood, for vengeance, for the violent justice that had defined his entire life. But she was looking at him with such faith, such belief that he could choose differently. For her, he could be different for her. He lowered the gun. "Take him," he said to his men. "Keep him alive. We'll negotiate with his family from a position of strength." As Seung-chul was dragged away, Jae-won pulled Amara close again. "You're going to be the death of me," he murmured, "or the saving of you." She looked up at him. "I prefer that option." He laughed, despite everything, and kissed her forehead, and held her like he would never let go. The aftermath of the kidnapping changed everything. The Hai-jo gang, faced with the evidence of Seung-chul's foolishness and the very real threat of Jae-won's wrath, negotiated a surrender. Their territories were absorbed into Baek-ho's operations, but the bloodshed that Amara had feared was largely avoided. Within the syndicate, Amara's role changed as well. She was no longer just Jae-won's lover. She had become something else entirely. A symbol. The men who had initially dismissed her as a weakness began to see her differently. She had been captured, threatened, hurt, and she had still managed to communicate vital information to Jae-won. She had talked him down from executing an enemy, potentially saving hundreds of lives on both sides. She was strong, she was clever, and she had the ear of the most powerful man in the Korean underworld. "They respect you," Jae-won told her one evening. They were on the penthouse balcony, watching the lights of Seoul flicker to life as night fell over the city. "My men, they've started calling you the Heart." Amara laughed. "That's ridiculous, is it?" He turned to look at her. "You've changed things, Amara. You've changed me." She leaned into him, and he wrapped his arms around her from behind. "I didn't do anything except love you. That's everything." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the city pulse with life below them. Millions of people going about their evenings, unaware of the empire that operated in their shadows. "I want to marry you," Jae-won said. Amara went very still. "I know it's complicated," he continued quickly. "My world isn't safe. There will always be people who want to hurt me, and by extension you. I can't promise you a normal life. I can't promise you peace." He turned her to face him. "But I can promise that I will spend every day trying to be worthy of you. I can promise that I will protect you with everything I have. I can promise that you will never be alone again." He pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside, a ring gleamed in the city lights. Simple. Elegant. A single diamond set in a band of white gold. "Amara Okonkwo, will you marry me?" Tears streamed down her face. "Yes," she said. 1,000 times yes. He slipped the ring on her finger, and she kissed him, and the city sparkled below them. And for one perfect moment, the world was exactly as it should be. The wedding was held 6 months later. It was a small ceremony, intimate, nothing like the grand affairs that powerful men in Jae-won's position usually threw. Amara had insisted on simplicity, and Jae-won had agreed without hesitation. What mattered wasn't the spectacle. What mattered was the commitment. Zuri was the flower girl. She walked down the aisle with exaggerated seriousness, scattering petals like she was performing surgery. The guests, a mix of Jae-won's most trusted lieutenants and Amara's small circle of loved ones, tried not to laugh. Grace sat in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Beside her, Secretary Yoon maintained his usual stoic expression, but there was a softness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. And when Amara walked down the aisle, dressed in simple white, Jae-won forgot how to breathe. She was beautiful. She was always beautiful, but today, with joy radiating from her face, she was transcendent. "You look," he trailed off, unable to find adequate words. "You too." She squeezed his hands, her smile incandescent, like a man who finally found what he was looking for. "I found her 4 years too late. You found her exactly when you were supposed to." They exchanged vows, simple ones, honest ones, not the flowery promises of fairy tales, but real commitments that acknowledged the complications of their life together. They promised to be honest, to be patient, to support each other through the darkness that would inevitably come. And when they kissed, the small crowd erupted in cheers. Later, at the reception, Grace approached Jae-won. "I want to say something to you," she said, her voice stern despite the tears still wet on her cheeks. Jae-won straightened instinctively. "Yes, ma'am. That girl has been through more hardship than anyone should ever face. She lost her parents, her home, her safety, and still, she found room in her heart to love you, with all your complications and dangers and darkness. I know. Do you?" Grace's eyes were sharp, piercing, "because if you ever make her cry tears of sadness, if you ever make her regret choosing you, I don't care how many soldiers you command, I will find a way to make you pay." Jae-won smiled, the first genuine smile he had ever offered this woman. "I believe you, and I welcome it, because if I ever hurt her, I'll deserve whatever you do to me." Grace studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You'll do," she said. "You'll do just fine." She patted his cheek, a gesture that was simultaneously gentle and warning. and walked away. Years passed. J1, under Amara's influence, began to shift the syndicate's operations, slowly, carefully, with the same strategic patience that had always defined his leadership. The drug trade was shut down. Human trafficking rings were not only abandoned, but actively dismantled. The syndicate used its power to destroy predators rather than become them. Money was funneled into legitimate enterprises, real estate, technology, entertainment. It wasn't a fairy tale transformation. The syndicate still operated outside the law in many ways. There were still moments of violence, still enemies who needed to be dealt with, still compromises that made Amara's stomach turn. But it was progress, a slow, difficult, imperfect journey towards something better. Zuri grew up healthy and happy and blissfully unaware of her uncle's real occupation. She thought he ran a boring investment company, which was technically true now. She excelled in school, developed a passion for art, and had the kind of normal childhood that neither Amara nor Jaewon had ever experienced. Grace lived to see her 80th birthday, surrounded by the family she had created from strangers and orphans. When she finally passed, peaceful and content, she left behind a legacy of love that continued to ripple outward through everyone she had touched. And Amara and Jaewon, against all odds, were happy. Not perfectly happy. Not the uncomplicated bliss of simple lives. There were fights, disagreements, moments when the darkness of his world threatened to overwhelm the light she brought. There were nights when he woke from nightmares, and she held him until the shaking stopped. There were days when she mourned the normal life she might have had, and he reminded her that normal was overrated. But through it all, they had each other. One evening, many years after their first meeting, they stood on the same balcony where he had proposed. The city had changed around them. Buildings had risen and fallen. Streets had been renamed. The skyline was different in 100 small ways, but their love remained constant. "Do you ever regret it?" Jaewon asked, staying with me. Amara considered the question seriously, as she always did. "I regret nothing," she said finally. "Every choice I made led me here, to you, to Zuri, to this life that's more than I ever dreamed possible." She turned to look at him, this man who had been monster and savior, stranger and soulmate. "You asked me once why I wasn't afraid of you. Do you remember what I said? You said you saw a man, a complicated man. I still see him." She touched his face. "Every day I see him, and every day I love him more." Jaewon pulled her close and she rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I never believed in redemption," he murmured. "Never believed someone like me could deserve happiness. And now I believe in you. That's enough." They stood together as the sun set over Seoul, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The city hummed with life below them, millions of stories unfolding in the gathering darkness. But their story was the one that mattered, a story of finding light in the darkest places, of love that defied expectation and logic and every rule they had been taught, of two broken people who somehow made each other whole. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was real. And they lived not happily ever after, but happily enough, with all the complications and challenges and moments of doubt that real love entails, which in the end is the best any of us can hope for. The end. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tap the notification bell so you never miss an update. Leave a comment telling me what you thought. Did this ending make you emotional? What part was your favorite? Until next time, take care of yourselves. And remember, sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one with the most to protect.